For many first-time mom and dads, expecting your first bundle of joy is such an exciting time. But for these soon-to-be parents, that exciting time was cut too short when they were executed in cold blood.
Now, more than a year after their horrific deaths, in terrible irony, two parents are heading to trial accused of helping their son hide the bodies. I'm Elizabeth Millner for Law&Crime.
For this case, we go to San Antonio, Texas, and go back to December 23rd of 2023. It's right before Christmas, but police are searching for missing 18-year-old Savanah Soto. For Savanah's family, they were extremely worried. She was pregnant, and at the time she went missing, she was actually set to be induced for labor. So when she didn't show up to the doctors that Saturday, you can imagine how concerning it was for Savanah's family. By Monday, police issued a clear alert, which is Texas's version of an Amber Alert for adults. But the following day, another twist. Savanah's boyfriend, Matthew Guerra, was also reported missing. For their families, they likely just wanted one simple question answered: where are they? Sadly, that question was answered. On December 26th, a family member was alerted about a car found in an apartment complex. The bodies of Savanah and Matthew were inside. Both were dead from gunshot wounds to the head. Their baby, who according to Savanah's mom was going to be named Fabian, didn't survive. Like many crime scenes, at first it was unclear what happened.
It appears to be a very complex crime scene. Very perplexing crime scene.
Savanah was discovered in the front seat with the car seat on top of her, while Matthew's body was found in the car's back seat. But there was something missing. No cell phones were found in the car, and detectives didn't find any guns. Now, 2 days later, after Savanah and Matthew's bodies were found, San Antonio police released this surveillance video. You can see a dark-colored pickup truck pull up next to Matthew's silver Kia. But here's the thing. Police say at the time this was captured on surveillance video, Matthew and Savanah were already dead. So it's not Matthew driving his own car. A few more seconds pass, and the driver of the pickup can be seen getting out of the truck, walking over to the gray Kia and talking to whoever is driving Matthew's car, then walking back to the pickup, and then both vehicles drive away. So this was enough for San Antonio PD to name the driver of the pickup and whoever was driving Matthew's car as persons of interest, meaning the next question that had to be answered: who were they? That answer came on January 3rd, a little more than a week after Savanah and Matthew were found dead.
They're going to be charged. The son's going to be charged this evening with capital murder, and the father's going to be charged with abuse of a corpse. So we do expect more charges to be pending.
The two that were arrested, shockingly, were a father and son duo, Christopher Preciado and his dad, Ramon. Investigators were led to them because of that surveillance video I mentioned. Also a clue left by Savanah herself.
One of the key pieces of evidence that we did collect at the scene was Savanah's cell phone. And that was handed over to our technology team, who was able to download some information on there. With the assistance of the U.S. Secret Service, we were able to get enough information, and so that information was given to our detectives today. With that information, the detectives were able to find a possible location of where the suspect vehicle that was released on that surveillance camera, the surveillance video, possible location where that suspect vehicle might be. They made that location, and sure enough, the vehicle was there. They did a little bit of surveillance on the video, or on the vehicle, and then were able to determine which house it belonged to. These two individuals are the only suspects that we were looking for. They were arrested. There were many names being thrown around on the internet. Those people had nothing to do with this. We vetted them and everything. They didn't have anything to do with these murderers. So the individual, again, Christopher, we believe committed the murders of Matthew and Savanah, and then Ramon helped kind of dump the butt.
SAPD also recovered the gun believed to be used in the double murder at their home. So you're probably wondering, why did the younger Preciado allegedly do this? Well, allegedly, over a drug deal for weed. Matthew was meeting Chris to sell to him. Something happened during the deal, and both Matthew and Savanah were shot and killed. But the way Chris told it to investigators, he was acting in self-defense. He told police Matthew and Savanah showed up to his home to sell him marijuana, then pointed a gun at him. And Chris says he manipulated the gun in a way that shot both Matthew and Savanah in the head. But investigators say that story doesn't match the evidence. Police say the gunshot wounds weren't consistent with his story. He was charged with capital murder, abuse of corpse, and tampering with evidence. Meanwhile, his dad was charged with tampering with evidence and abuse of corpse. But remember when I said two parents are heading to trial? About a week after Christopher and Ramon were arrested, Christopher's stepmom was also locked up. She was accused of helping dump Savanah and Matthew's bodies. Now, according to police, Myrta Romanos told police she didn't have knowledge of the murders and wasn't in the truck when her husband and stepson were seen in the surveillance video at the apartment complex. But additional surveillance video showed she was in the truck and was seen unloading items after allegedly helping. And then you have the gun believed to be used in the murder also found at their home. But Myrta told police no one had access to her room where she kept the gun. Police seemingly had enough to arrest her. And she, her husband, and stepson have all remained behind bars since their January 2024 arrests. But for Myrta and Ramon, their next step is trial, and they're going to be tried together. Now that's set to begin at the end of March. So we'll soon learn what a jury has to say about the whole case. As for Christopher, no trial date has been set for him just yet.
Hey, I know we have a lot of sponsors here at Law&Crime, and we appreciate you supporting them and, of course, supporting us. But we'd really like to know from all of you, what do you all like? We created a 5-question survey that takes less than 30 seconds to fill out. You tell us what kind of brands or products you use, which could make it super helpful to make sure we put the right companies in front of you. Also, if you fill out the survey, as a thank you, we'll randomly select 5 people and send you free Law&Crime t-shirts. So please fill out the survey at lawandcrime.com/survey. It'll take less than 30 seconds and you could win some free Law&Crime merch. It's such a horrific and horrible case. Let's break down what this upcoming trial could look like with attorney Melba Pearson. Melba, always great to see you, and thank you so much for being here with me today. Before we get into what this trial could look like, what's your reaction to this case overall?
Well, again, always thank you for having me on, Elizabeth, and very disturbing. I'm all about families supporting each other and, parents sticking up for their kids and supporting them in their time of need. But covering up a homicide is a bridge too far. And in the manner in which they did so was even more disturbing because it wasn't sort of, not that any of it is excusable, but just sort of like, oh, hey, can you just throw this out for me, is a lot different than wiping fingerprints off of a car. Like, as you're doing it, you're actively destroying evidence. You know that somebody was killed in that vehicle, and yet you are wiping it down to make sure that your child's fingerprints don't end up on law enforcement's radar. That's just ugly and very, very gross, and I have absolutely no sympathy for them at this juncture.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic and a terrible irony at that, given that, these two parents helped their child who was accused of killing 2 soon-to-be parents as well, too. And now that we have the 2 parents heading to trial next month, accused of helping their son dispose of those 2 bodies, it's a joint trial. What do you think that could look like?
It makes sense because it's going to be a little difficult for them to place the blame on each other. Usually that is the concern you have when you have multiple defendants being tried at the same time. Many times it's, well, I didn't really do this. It was this person's fault, or this was the person who pulled the trigger, or, I was just the driver. I was along for the ride. They both seem to have had active roles. So it's going to be very hard for them to blame each other for the others for their particular actions. So I think that a joint trial is going to be good in this instance from the standpoint that, number one, you're preserving taxpayer dollars. Having multiple trials and multiple juries and multiple judges ends up costing a lot more money, as well as dragging out the process so that the victim's family could get closure a lot faster than if it was 3 separate individual trials. So there's that being more expeditious, I think, and more effective is one aspect of it. But at the end of the day, I think it's important for the jury to see the 2 of them together to understand that this was 2 parents acting in concert to cover up their child's homicide. And let me be clear, we're saying child, this is a grown adult that committed this homicide. So, let's just be very clear on that. But I think it sends a very powerful message to the jury, especially when the prosecutor gets up to do their argument and pointing at the parents and being like, these are the 2 people that helped or tried to help their son escape accountability for the horrible murder of 2 expectant parents who, based on what we can see at this juncture, didn't do anything to deserve this. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't anything along those lines that they could even really effectively claim self-defense, which I know we're going to talk about momentarily, but
Absolutely. Of course, we're going to get into that in just a little bit. But do you think prosecutors have enough evidence on the stepmom to convict? I remember when all of them were arrested just last year. And I at first was like, do they have enough on the stepmom? She was allegedly in the truck with her husband that was caught on that surveillance video. And then you see a close up of her getting out of the truck after, they were, Ramon and Chris were talking in that parking lot, probably figuring out what to do with Savanah and Matthew's bodies. But as far as the stepmom goes, what do you think that prosecutors need to convict her in her trial next month?
The key in order to convict both of the parents, but especially the stepmom in this instance, would be looking at, did she provide material help or assistance? That's usually the standard for accessory after the fact. And it can't be something more like, oh, wow, I saw something and therefore now I'm accessory after the fact. You had to do something active. So did she provide aid in cleaning the crime scene? There's surveillance video that had her in the truck. Clearly she knew, because if you have a homicide where people were shot, and I hate to be graphic about this, but there's going to be biological evidence inside of the truck. And purportedly that's what she assisted in cleaning up. So you know that if you see, obviously, sadly, a bullet in someone's head, you know that this wasn't a natural cause. You know that this wasn't an accident. So there were plenty of signs there for her to be like, wait a minute, no. This is, I'm not okay with this, and leave. Go call the police, try and render aid, or just separate yourself completely from the situation. Then we'd be in a different discussion. But because of the fact that she's seen getting in and out of the car and purportedly cleaning up the crime scene, I think the prosecution is going to have more than enough to be able to convict her. Again, assuming the parents don't take a plea beforehand, which if I was their defense counsel, that would be the first thing I would be doing, would be speaking to the prosecution and seeing what sort of plea agreement, what's the best plea agreement I can get for my clients, because I don't see a jury being very forgiving of their actions.
Absolutely. And why do you think that prosecutors are trying their case first as opposed to the alleged actual killer, that being Chris?
There could be a number of reasons for that. Number one, they could be hoping to put pressure on them in terms of, listen, a plea is now on the table. We can reduce that even more if you testify against your child and testify against your son. So it can be partially a play to be able to turn them into cooperating witnesses. That's one option. Secondly, it's a slightly easier case, a little bit more straightforward in a lot of ways. In terms of the number of elements that are needed to prove their guilt, it's a pretty straightforward case. So again, you may want to get that out of the way. And then, of course, you see the parents get convicted. Now, of course, if you're the defendant, the actual killer in this case, you're going to be looking at the situation like, maybe I want to take a plea, or maybe this could just not go well for me. So maybe I'll plea open to the court and let the judge decide my fate. There could be a number of different strategies that could be employed by the defense after seeing how the prosecution case goes. Now, flip side, prosecution ends up losing and gets a not guilty verdict. That does not mean that the actual homicide trial can't go forward. It just might be a bit weaker.
And that may be when that plea deal might actually happen. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that unfolds when the case goes to trial next month. And going back to Chris's portion of this case overall, I want to go back to a point you had mentioned about the whole self-defense aspect, how Chris told police that he was acting in self-defense in a way because Matthew and Savanah came to his home, pointed a gun at him, which to me made absolutely no sense. But what is your thoughts on Chris telling police that? Do you think that was just an excuse as to, hey, I'm caught at this point, I'm just going to make up whatever excuse for them to be lenient on me? But what do you make of his version of events that don't align with the evidence?
Well, I agree with you absolutely, Elizabeth. The version of events does not align with the physical evidence, and that's going to come out at trial because, ballistics expert will come up and talk about the trajectory of where, the bullet went, and that clearly this was not an accidental self-defense struggle, and this was more of a targeted homicide. But, of course, you're going to work with what you got. And he was basically caught red-handed. So, of course, he's going to make the argument that this is self-defense, but the injuries are not going to substantiate substantiate that. So, and also too, how did they get to the scene? My understanding is that this potentially was a marijuana deal gone wrong. Again, if it was the defendant that set this in motion, you can't now engage in illegal activity and then try to claim stand your ground or some other hybrid of that, because you don't get those immunity and those protections if you're involved in criminal activity. So there's a few different layers happening here that we're going to have to see how it all bears out. But he's not in a very strong position at this juncture.
Yeah, not at all. In your opinion, do you think that Savanah Soto was, and I hate to phrase it this way, but collateral damage into what happened? Investigators haven't pointed to like there being a motive as far as robbery goes or anything like that, but maybe there was an exchange between Matthew and Chris that got heated. Savanah was in the car and she could have been an eyewitness into potentially what happened. But why do you think that Chris allegedly shot and killed Savanah? She's 9 months pregnant, was about to be induced, but what do you make of just the gruesomeness of the case overall?
It's just disgusting and just heartless. And I believe that it was a matter of, oh my gosh, this person can identify and testify against me. And of course, brand new mother getting on the stand and saying, listen, I just saw my partner, the father of my child, get murdered in front of me. You can't get much more powerful testimony than that. And so somewhere in his mind, he may have been thinking, I need to eliminate any witnesses so that I could potentially get away with this. Which again still speaks to the tragedy of all of this, because surveillance cameras still caught him on video. So you have an unbiased witness that can attest to what you did. So you murdered this woman, not to say that there's ever a reason, but like literally you murdered her and it did not give you the intended effect, which was to help you escape accountability. You just wasted 2 lives for absolutely no reason. And it's, again, the courts are not, and the jury are not going to be sympathetic with this at all.
Absolutely. And again, this is a Texas jury. It's in Bexar County. Savanah Soto was pregnant. I don't think a jury will be very sympathetic at all, possibly to all parties. Melba, how important is the surveillance evidence going to be, the cell phone evidence going to be in a case like this?
The electronic evidence is going to be critical in this case. First of all, the surveillance is the main piece of evidence that places him on the scene and that you can clearly see his actions and the actions of the parents involved in trying to cover up this crime. So first off, that's going to be critical. Then you have the cell phone evidence that also places them at the scene. So if you're not even sure that you believe your eyes, you will believe the cell phone data that shows that they are pinging off of a tower that is in the proximity of where this homicide occurred. So they can't now claim, we weren't there, my phone was there, but I wasn't. Those 2 pieces of evidence in tandem are going to be critical to the prosecution's case. And again, make it very difficult for any defense to really effectively move forward.
Absolutely. And again, we'll have to wait and see how this all unfolds next month when 2 parents go on trial. Melba Pearson, again, thank you so much for your time today. Before we sign you off, anything else you'd like to add?
No, my heart just breaks for the families that are now, burying 3 people. Let's not forget, there was a child involved who was just about to join us on this earth. And now you have a family that instead of celebrating the birth of their grandchild, of a niece, of a nephew, whatever the case may be, they're now having 3 funerals. And my heart just breaks for them.
Absolutely. Melba, again, thank you so much for your insight into this case. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Myrta Romanos and Ramon Preciado are set to go on trial on March 31st. Meanwhile, Christopher Preciado remains locked up, held on a $2 million bond. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.